Chapter 8. The Giant Who Does Not Know When He Has Had Enough. One morning the post brought a truly enormous letter for Dick. It was as broad as a tablecloth, and the address was written in letters as long as a hoopstick. "The hand I seem to know," said Ricardo, "but I thought the fingers which held the pen would have long been cold in death." He opened, with a sword, the enormous letter, which was crouched in the following terms: "The giant, as does not know when he has had enough, presents his compliments to Prince Ricardo, and I, having recovered from the effects of our little recent rally, will be happy to meet you in the old place for a return match. I was being rather hasty with the pen. The giant hopes you will excuse the bad writing." The giant is mentioned, and his picture drawn in an old manuscript of about 1875. Dick simply gazed in amazement. "If I ever thought an enemy was killed and done for, it was that giant," said he. "Why, I made minced chops out of him." However, he could not refuse the challenge, not to speak of his duty to rid the world of so greedy and odious a tyrant. Dick therefore took the usual things, which the king had secretly restored. But first he tried them, putting on the cap of darkness before a glass in which he could not see himself. On second thoughts, he considered it unfair to take the cap, and the other articles were in the working order. Jaqueline on this occasion followed him overhead in the disguise of a crow, flying above him. On reaching the cavern, a huge tunnel in the rock where the giant lived, Ricardo blew the blast of a horn which hung outside, and, in obedience to a written notice, knocked also with the mace provided by the giant for that purpose. Presently he heard heavy footsteps sounding along the cavern, and the giant came out. He was above the common height for giants, and his whole face and body were seamed over with little red lines, crossing each other like a tartan. These were the marks of encounters, in which he had been cut to bits and come together again. For this was his particularity, which made him very dangerous. If you cut off his head, he went on just as before, only without it, and so everything else. By dint of magic, he could put his head on again, just as if it had been his hat, if you gave him some time. On the last occasion of their meeting, Ricardo had left him in a painfully scattered condition, and thought he was done for. But now, except for a bird that had flown away with a little finger of his left hand and one of his ears, the giant was as comfortable as anyone could be in this situation. "Morning, sir," he said to Dick, touching his forehead with his hand. "Glad to see you looking well. Not bad feeling, I hope, on the other side." "Oh, not on mine, certainly," said Ricardo, holding out his hand, which the giant took to shake. "But duty is duty, and giants must go. The modern world has no room for them."
"That's hearty," said the giant. "I like a fellow of your kind. Now, shall we toss for corners?"
"All right," said Dick, calling, "Heads," and winning. He took the corner with the sun to his back, and in the giant's face. To it they went, the giant aiming a blow with his club that would have felled an elephant. Dick dodged and cut off the giant's feet at the ankles.
"First blood for the prince," said the giant, coming up smiling. "Half-minute time."
He occupied the half-minute by placing the feet neatly beside each other, as if there had been a pair of boots. Round 2. The giant sparring for wind, Ricardo cuts him in two at the waist. The giant folded his legs up neatly like a pair of trousers and laid them down on a rock. He now had some difficulty in getting rapidly over to the ground, and stood mainly on the defensive, and on his waist. Round 3. Dick bisects the giant. Both sides now attack him on either hand, and the feet kick him severely. "No kicking," said Dick.
"Nonsense, all fair in war," said the giant.
But let us not pursue this sanguinary encounter with all its horrible details. Let us also remember, otherwise suspense would be too painful for an elegant mind to contemplate with entertainment, that the giant was in excellent training, and thought no more of a few rounds than you do of a crack on the leg from a cricket ball. He well deserved the title given to him by the fancy of the giant who does not know when he has had enough. The contest was over. Dick was resting on a rock. Lists were strewn and with interesting but imperfect fragments of the giant. when a set of double teeth of enormous size flew up out of the ground and caught Ricardo by the throat. In vain he strove to separate the teeth, when the crow, stooping from the heavens, became the Princess Jaqueline and changed Dick into a wren, a tiny bird, so small he was easy to fly out of the jaws of the giant, and winged his way to a tree whence he watched the scene. Oh, but poor Princess Jaqueline. To perform this feat of changing Dick into a bird, she had, of course, according to all laws of magic, to resume her own natural form. There she stood, a beautiful, trembling maiden, her hands crossed at her bosom, entirely at the mercy of the giant. No sooner had Dick escaped the monster and began to collect himself, and before Jaqueline could muster strength to run away or summon to her aid the lessons of the fairy Arabanu, the giant, who never knew when he had enough, was himself again. The boy had climbed up a tree, for giants are no tree climbers, any more than a grizzly bear. But Jaqueline could not climb. She merely stood, pale and trembling. She had saved Dick, but at an enormous sacrifice, for the sword and 7-league boots were lying on the trampled grass. He had not brought the cap of darkness, and in the shape of a wren, of course, he could not carry away the other articles. Dick was rescued, that was all, and the princess had sacrificed herself through her love for him. The giant picked himself up and pulled himself together, as we said, to approach Jaqueline in a very civil way for a person of his breeding, head in hand.
Let me introduce myself,
He said, and mentioned his name and titles.
May I ask what you are doing here, and how you came?
Poor Jaqueline threw herself at his feet and murmured a short and not very intelligible account of herself.
I don't understand,
said the giant, replacing his head on his shoulders.
Oh, what to do with you, I'm not sure I know. Please don't eat me, did you say? Why, what do you take from me? I'm not of that line at all. No, I call it.
Jaqueline was somewhat comforted by these words, and dropped the sight of the giant's lips from a considerable height. But they call you the giant who does not know when he has had enough, said Jaqueline.
And proud of the title, not enough of fighting. A punishment, I'm a glutton. Or so my friends are pleased to say. A brace of oxen, drove of sheep or two, are enough for me.
The giant went on complacently, but forgetting to mention that the sheep and the oxen were the property of other people.
Where am I to put you till your friends come and pay your ransom?
Said again, staring at Jaqueline in a perplexed way.
I can't take you home with me. That is out of the question. I have a little woman of my own, and she's not very fond of other ladies. Especially she would like to poison them that have good looks.
Now Jaqueline saw that the giant, big as he was, and courageous too, was afraid of his wife.
I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll hand you over to a neighbor of mine who is a bachelor.
A bachelor giant? Well, that's quite proper, said Jaqueline, trying to humor him.
Oh, he's not a giant, bless you. He's a queer fellow, and it's not easy to say what he is. He's an earthquaker. With him it shakes the earth now and then, and brings the houses of people about their ears.
Jaqueline fairly screamed at hearing this awful news.
Hush! Be quiet, do, said the giant. You'll bring out my little woman, and she is not easy to satisfy with explanations when she finds me conversing with a lady unbeknown to her. The earthquaker won't do you any harm. It's only for safekeeping. I'll put you with him. Why, he don't waken once in 50 years. He's quite the dormouse. Turns on his bed now and then, and things upset, more or less. But as a rule, a child could play with him. Come on.
Then taking Jaqueline up in one hand, on which she sat as if on a chair, they crossed a few ranges of mountains with many strides. In front of one tall blue hill, with a flattened peak, as they drew near, the princess felt a curious kind of wind coming around her and around her. You have heard of the whirlpools of water. Well, this is kind of a whirlpool of air. Even the giant himself could hardly keep his legs against it. Then he tossed Jaqueline up, and the airy whirlpool seized her and carried her, as if on a tide of water, always round and round in narrowing circles, until she was sucked down to a hollow hill. Even as she went, she seemed to remember the hill, as if she had dreamt about it, and the shape and the color of the country. But presently she sank softly onto a couch, in a beautifully lighted rocky hall. All around her the floor was white and red marble, and on the side it seemed to end in black nothing. Jaqueline, after a few moments, recovered her senses fully, and changed herself into an eagle and tried to fly up and out. But as soon as she was in the funnel, the whirlpool of air, always sucking down and down, was too strong for her wings. She was a prisoner in this great gleaming hall, ending in black nothingness. So she resumed her usual form, and walking on the edge of darkness, she found it was not empty air, but something black, soft, strong, something living. It had no form or shape, or none that she could make out, but it pulsed with a heart. Jaqueline placed her foot on this curious thing, then a voice came out, like thunder heard from a feather bed.
No, not near time to get up.
And then there was a snore, and the great hall rocked like a ship at sea. It was the Earthquaker. The habits of this monstrous animal are very little known, as, of course, he never comes above the ground, or at least very seldom, when he makes tracks like a dry riverbed across country. We're certain that there are Earthquakers, otherwise, how can there be earthquakes? But how to tackle an Earthquaker, how to get at him, and what to do with him when you've got him, are questions which might puzzle even King Prigio. It is not easy to have the better of an enchantress like Jaqueline and a prince like Ricardo. In no ordinary circumstances could they have been baffled and defeated, but now it must be admitted that they were in a very trying and alarming situation, especially the princess. The worst of it was, as Jaqueline sat and thought, she began to remember that she was back in her own country. The hills were those she used to see in her father's palace windows when she was a child, and she remembered with horror that once a year her people used to send a beautiful girl to the Earthquaker, by way of keeping him quiet, as you shall hear presently. And now she heard light footsteps and sounds of weeping, and lo, the great troop of pretty girls passed, sweeping in and out from the halls, in a kind of procession, and looking unhappy and lost. Jaqueline ran to them. "Where am I? Who are you?" she cried, in the language of her own country, which came back to her on a sudden. "The nurses of the Earthquaker," they said. "Our duty is to sing him to sleep, and every year he must have a new song. And every year a new maiden must be sent down from earth with a new sleepy song she has learned from Princess Manuela in the City of the Sun. Are you the new singer?" "No, I'm not," said Jaqueline. "I don't know any of the priests of Manoa. I don't know any of these new sleeping songs. I only want to find a way out." "There is no way, or we should have found it," said one of the maidens. "And if you're a wrong girl, by the day after tomorrow we must send the right one. Otherwise the Earthquaker will waken and shake the world and destroy Manuel, the City of the Sun." Then they all wept softly in the stillness. "Can we get anything to eat here?" asked poor Jaqueline at last. She was beginning to be very hungry, and however alarmed she might be, she felt that dinner would not be unwelcome. The tallest of the maidens clapped her hands, and immediately a long table was spread by unseen sprites, with meringues and cold chicken and several sorts of delicious ices. We shall desert Jaqueline, who was rather less alarmed when she found that she was not to be starved, at all events, and return to Prince Ricardo, whom we left fluttering about as a little golden-crested wren. He followed the giant and Jaqueline into the whirlpool of air as far as he had dared. And when he saw her vanish down the cone in the hill, he flew straight back to Pantuflia.